back to Franchise Vibes. And the vibe we're on today is legal vibes. So today we're going to be going over avoiding pitfalls in your franchise journey. And I'm so happy that we have our guest here. I've actually worked with Mark before. We've been on a stage together. Mark Kirsch from Lathrop GPM. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
All right. So let's get into it. So Mark, with over 35 years of experience in franchising, what initially drew you to specializing in franchise law?
It's funny, I fell into franchise law. Nothing drew me into it initially. I was practicing law for a couple of years, and it was primarily a dispute resolution regulatory practice. And I didn't like it. I was looking for something that was more business focused, commercial focused, transactional focused. And there was a law firm that I learned had one of the best franchise practices in the country, and they were looking for someone, and I got the job, and I just fell in love with franchising. I love the diversity of the entire practice. You work with large companies and small companies, startups and multinationals. You work in industries. There's probably over 100 industries in franchising, the typical ones you might think about, like fast food and restaurants and the like, but healthcare and education and product distribution. You work with entrepreneurs. It's just a wonderful opportunity and a lot of different issues. So that's what's kept me going.
Awesome, awesome. And you know, as part of my process, I always make sure that I tell any of the candidates, the clients that I'm working with, that part of the process should be to include a franchise attorney, specifically a franchise attorney. And I make that part of the process. Now, whether or not they decide to move forward with it, you know, that's another thing, but I'm hoping that this is going to shine some light on some of the reasons as to, you know, why it is very important. So let's talk about the legal pitfalls when it comes to franchising. What are some of the most common ones that new franchisors and franchisees encounter?
It's great. And there's a difference between franchisors and franchisees. And even in the franchisor sector, their startup and small franchisors have different issues than large or mature franchisors. So a startup franchisor or a small franchisor, I think the biggest concern is being undercapitalized, not having the resources, not just to grow, but to support your franchisees. The second thing is, particularly for startups, is not working the kinks out of your system. Someone's going to come to you to be a franchisee. You're going to grant them a franchise, a license to use your brand, your system. They're expecting you to have worked out the kinks of multiple unit ownership or multiple unit operations. And so it's important to get those kinks out. I mean, the franchisor hasn't a magic wand to say, oh, you do this and you're going to be 100% successful. But it's those little things that a prospective franchisee is looking for. Third, you don't want your eyes to be bigger than your stomach. Make sure you grow slowly, proportionately, close to where your headquarters are. And the last thing for small franchisors is be selective about your franchise development. The joke is don't take anybody with a check and can fog a mirror, but really look at who your franchisees will be, because they are going to be your ambassadors. If they're successful, you're successful, and you'll get more franchisees. The larger franchisors, they've already passed those issues, but they need to focus on their franchisees and the franchisees' bottom line. And good ones do that. And they don't lose sight of unit economics for the franchisees. And the other thing is communicating shared goals, because the franchisor is growing, franchisees are growing also, but they have to have shared goals, and the communication is really important. So those are some of the topic issues for small franchisors and large franchisors. Now, you also want to ask about franchisees. The biggest issue for franchisees is do your homework, do your diligence, figure out, not before you even say, I want to buy brand X or brand Y, figure out if you can be a solid business owner. What does it mean to own and operate your own business as opposed to being very successful in the corporate world? I mean, and so then do your diligence on the companies and the industries, and then Okay, you figure out what you want to do. Make sure you're not undercapitalized. There it is again, undercapitalization. Also expect challenges, expect bumps in the road. It's not buying a franchise is not a key to success. I mean, you can own your own business, whether it's a Dunkin' Donuts or Mark's Donut Shop. You have to. It's going to be a struggle, and that's why it's important to get good advisors along the way. I mean, people like you, Tamika, business coaches, consultants, and yes, lawyers and accountants. I don't say that because I'm a lawyer, but you wouldn't hire your brother-in-law, who's a family law lawyer, to review your real estate lease, any more so than you would want your real estate lawyer to review your franchise agreement. Things are specialized in this world, not just in the legal industry. And so you go to the specialists. It's really helpful. You get to see the problems ahead of time or see the potential pitfalls and hopefully avoid them.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So let's talk more about the get into contracts and the agreements a little more. What should franchisees look for when reviewing a franchise agreement to ensure that they are protected?
Let me just step back one little bit to talk about the legal and regulatory framework of franchising. And maybe people on this who are watching know this. So franchising is regulated at the federal level and the state level. And it's based on securities laws. And the regulations are designed to protect prospective franchisees, help them make a good decision about buying a franchise or not buying a franchise, and which franchise to buy. And so at the federal level and state level, there is something called a franchise disclosure document, or FDD. And that's a document that describes the franchise opportunity. It talks about the history of the franchisor, officers and directors, litigation, initial cost, ongoing costs, ongoing fees, advertising, trademarks, etc. And in that FDD, there is the financial statements of the franchisor, all the current franchisees in the system, franchisees who left the system in the last year, and now getting to your question, the main contract, the franchise agreement, and any contracts that will be signed. And so the first thing to do is, get a franchise lawyer once you're in there. Review the FDD and review the franchise agreement. The franchisee should do it as well as their counsel. Understand what's there and what's not there. There's certain things in the FDD that you don't have in the franchise agreement. So there's more detail about the entire system in the FDD than the franchise agreement. There's more detail about the training program. And so you can use the FDD to help you do your diligence. So that's part of it. Now, what are some of the critical issues? How much is it going to cost you? That's the first thing everyone's going to ask. What's the initial fee? And a lot of franchises have an initial fee. What's the ongoing royalty? It could be a percentage of sales. What are the other fees? Advertising fees, technology fees, training fees, etc. And what I'm going to say now really applies to a lot of things. A franchise agreement, many of them go from 10 years to 20 years. Usually it's a 10-year term with a renewal of maybe 2, 5, or 10-year renewals. It's a dynamic system. Whatever you sign up for today should be different 5 and 10 years from now. Any business should evolve. Franchisors want to and need to be able to develop and evolve their system. So they put provisions in franchise agreements that allow them to do that. In theory, and I think in practice, most of them do it very fairly. But you have to be aware as a prospective franchisee that things can change and how they can change. So anyway, that's kind of an overview. So territorial protections is another issue. So a lot of, you get a restaurant franchise or a retail franchise, and you get a protected territory. What does that mean? What is that? That means that in most cases that the franchisor will not put another fixed location unit within that territory. It could be a mile, it could be a driving radius. But it may be that the franchisor reserves rights to itself to do other things, like other concepts in a different brand, or selling products through different channels of distribution.
Mhm.
Perfect example would be in the ice cream field, whether it's Ben and Jerry's or Haagen-Dazs, and I'm just picking those because they're big brand names. If you get a franchise, you get protection. They're not going to put another unit, another ice cream store within your territory, but they will be able to sell that same product in prepackaged pints at a grocery store, which could be in the same shopping center. You have to know those sorts of things. Or they may grant a special franchise at the a community fair, or a long-term lease at a sports arena, which may be in your territory. It's a different market. But anyway, understanding those territorial rights. What's also important is we're all talking about the beginning of the franchise relationship. We need to understand the end of the franchise relationship.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and so what happens in 10 years or 20 years? I mean, what if you have, kids you want to pass it on to, or you just want to sell your business, you built it up and you want to sell it. There are restrictions on transfers, whether to family members or non-family members. It's not that you can't, you have to follow certain rules. And remember, the franchisor's perspective is that I granted you a franchise, I qualified you. I don't want you just selling it to anybody who's not going to be good for our system, or someone who may not have the financial wherewithal or the ability to run the business, or is already operating a competing business. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons why franchisors want to do that. Another thing post ending, and I won't get to termination yet, but is non-competition covenants. So many franchise agreements will say that you cannot operate a competing business while you're operating the franchise. And they'll say, when you leave the business, you can't operate a competing business in certain areas for a period of 1 or 2 years. So it's a non-competition covenant. Now, you may have read or heard about the FTC has come down with rulings to prohibit non-compete agreements. They don't apply to franchising. One other thing to think about is the termination and default. What will happen as a franchisee if you don't follow the rules, don't pay the fees, don't do something else, or do something, understanding what are the tripwires, what are the opportunity to cure, et cetera. So those are, some of the things. Last thing, I guess, is dispute resolution. Every contract says how disputes will be resolved. Is it in litigation? Is it in arbitration? Is there mediation before arbitration or litigation? Is it going to be in the franchisor's home state or not? Things of that nature. I will say a lot of these terms are hard to negotiate. Franchisors, whether they're big or small, want to keep a uniform system. But even if you can't negotiate these things or can't get changes, at least knowing what the issues are is real important.
Yeah, I think, that's what's really key as well, because it's a huge document. And I always tell my candidates, I said, listen, I said, you have everything you need, as far as like you're gonna, it's nothing that's really too like hidden. Like you're gonna have everything within the franchise disclosure document, right? I'm like, it's like your Bible and everything is there. But the key to is understanding what particular things mean. Like, what does this mean to you? What's important to you? And what does it mean, to you? And I think that, someone that is a franchise attorney, such as yourself, is going to be able to really extract that. You're going to be able to speak with the client to know, well, here's the things, here's your concerns, here are the things that can happen, and whatever the case is. And I think that that's the best way to go about it. I mean, it's, they give you, one thing I always tell them as well is that you have 15 business days before you can move forward with signing, for a reason, because they want to give you, they're giving you the time to do their due diligence. That's why you cannot sign, right away. You have to be able to take the time to do it. So why not have an expert that's going to be able to really take you through the things that you really need to know about what you're getting into?
I agree. And I'll say it's not just lawyers, it's consultants like you, it's accountants. I mean, yeah, as you said, the rule is that no one can sign a franchise agreement unless they've had the FDD, the big old document, for 14 business days. It's actually 14 days, I'm sorry. It's actually more like 15 because of some weird rules, but very few franchises sell that quickly. I mean, it's more like a 60, 90, or 120 days from someone gets the FDD, does their diligence, works things out, etc. It really depends on the franchise. So you need the time. And you're exactly right. All the information's there, or if it's not there, it leads you to information. So you've now determined that you're interested in brand X. There's this list of franchisees, their name and address and phone number. Call them, and they were in your position, and ask them, how's the franchisor? What is he or she or they doing to support you? What are some of the challenges you've had? Things of that nature. What did you negotiate? When you negotiated your lease with the landlord, what was needed? Do you have access to a banker that might lend to me that's already familiar with this particular brand X? There's a lot you can ask. And then one thing we haven't even talked about is this thing called item 19. Okay, so if anyone, the FDD's got 23 items, all right? And I don't need to go through all of them. Everyone talks about item 19. Item 19 is what's called a financial performance representation. It's information that helps a prospective franchisee answer a really important question. How much am I going to make? And franchisors can't really tell you that. Most FDDs that have an item 19 financial performance representation, or FPR, I know you're going to hear it, FTD, FTC, FPR. It is what it is. Sorry, a lot of letters. It will often give historical information on the franchisees and company-owned units in the system. It will give certain information. Usually, it's for outlets that have been operating for at least a year. But it's only a base. It's usually not a full P&L. Sometimes it's just a top line gross sales number. Sometimes it's a limited P&L, but it's your starting point. And that's when you talk to your accountant or other financial advisor and say, help me figure this out. Help me model this. What are my business costs going to be? What are my personal costs? What's my mortgage? What are, all of those things? And how will this work into it? So, you're absolutely right. It's all there, but it's, in some respects, it's just a starting point for more.
Right. That's a great way of putting it. So have you seen, how often do you see issues arise from poorly drafted contracts? Like, on what are the key elements that must be included in these agreements?
Of course, you would never see a poorly drafted contract from me. I mean, as I generally represent franchisors, but another backup point. So the franchise agreement, as I said, deals with, let's say, 10 years worth of the operation. You can't put everything into a franchise agreement that could occur in 10 years. So there is something called the operations manual or operating manual or confidential manuals. This is another document that the franchisors prepare. It's not provided with the FDD. That really goes into a lot of the details of how the business operates. So like menus or recipes or site selection advice or opening, closing. There's a lot that goes in there. A lot of what is in the franchise agreement says, here's the rule as it may be changed from time to time as set forth in the manual or something like that. Now, franchisors can't use the manuals to completely change the business, but they want to add a new product line. They want to change the payment system, not the payment amount, the payment system. Those are where you find things in the manual. So looking, the problems with some contracts is that the ability to modify the system is not clearly articulated. Okay. And if it is clearly articulated, it's important for the franchisee to understand that. So what are some of the issues? Some of the terms I mentioned before are really key elements. The term of the contract and the renewals. And what does it mean to get a renewal? And do you have to sign a new agreement with new terms upon renewal or extension? What are the fees and payments? What's the advertising program? What does a franchisee have to do itself? And what is contributed to maybe a brand fund? And who has responsibility for that? There's trademark and brand protection in the franchise agreement. Franchisees need to understand that this is a brand. It's not just a relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee. It's the franchisor, the franchisee, and all these other franchisees and the customer. It's a whole system. And so things are being done to protect the ecosystem of that franchise brand. And so it's important to understand what is there. And sometimes, when you say where there are problems, it's just it hasn't been articulated properly. And then a franchisee wants to do X, or a franchisor wants to impose Y, and it's not there in the contract. And so I will say that the best relationships, franchise relationships, are the one where people sign the contract and both parties put it in the drawer because they trust each other. They see how things are working, and they communicate throughout the relationship, either, franchisee one-on-one or franchise advisory committees and things of that nature, which is probably a topic unto itself. So, I would say default and termination is another problematic area. Franchise agreements could just say, if you don't comply with our terms and conditions, we can terminate you. Well, no one's going to want that. And so things get spelled out. And the more it gets spelled out, the better it is for both parties. But then, well, what about this, or what about that? And so I think the biggest problems are where there's a lack of communication and trust. It usually stems from the relationship, and then people go to the contract. If the relationship is built on good communication and good trust, you usually can get past these issues, usually.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so a lot of things that you said on both subtopics, I would say also reminds me of why I stress the validation process as well. Making sure, you don't skip that. You want to speak to as many franchisees as comfortable, to get a sense of a lot of these different things that you can kind of get an idea of how things are going with them, and if this is something that they would do again, etc.
That's a great question. That's probably one of the best questions someone can ask. I'm glad you raised that. When you talk to a franchisee, what's good, what's bad, would you buy this franchise again? Would you buy a second one? Would you buy a third? And then when you talk to franchisees that have bought a second or third or fourth, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I say that's probably one of the best questions to ask. And I do help out with, providing like resources like that, like, some good questions when it comes to speaking with the franchisors and speaking with the franchisees as well. So yeah, I'm glad it all ties together. So let's get into some of the rights and responsibilities. Could you explain the critical rights and responsibilities that both the franchisors and the franchisees need to be aware of?
I would say there's this overarching concept for both sides. Respect the contract. If the contract says X, do X. If the contract says don't do Y, don't do Y. If the contract says one party will do something, then do it, and do it faithfully. And it also goes back to that other comment about a system. There's the franchisor, the franchisee, the other franchisees, and the consumers. And so whatever action one franchisee takes has an impact, positive or negative, on the entire system. So that's one of the benefits of franchising, that you get the halo effect of a brand, whether it's a small regional brand or a national brand. Whatever one franchisee does affects the other. It could be good, but if someone does a poor job, down the street, across town, it's going to affect you. So respect the contract. Key things: franchisees, pay your fees and pay your fees on time. Contribute to advertising. Support the initiatives that the franchisor is putting out there, and essentially follow the system. If the system says, we're going to get rid of these products in the spring, or we're going to add these products in the fall, or we're going to use a different supplier, don't go find a different supplier. Follow the supplier. Okay. The franchisor needs to protect the brand. And whatever in theory, and I think again in practice, that's what franchisors do. They say, this is important, not just for me, it's important for all my franchisees. And the next thing, and this is not a specific contract issue, but it's protecting and enhancing the franchisee's profitability. Look at unit economics, and whatever a franchisor does, it should be done with the idea we're trying to improve unit economics. It may be a different supplier, it may be a different menu mix, it may be a different digital strategy for advertising, but it's being designed primarily for growth of the system. And yes, there's no question, the more money the franchisee makes, the more money the franchisor makes. But franchisors know that if they are not looking at the franchisee's bottom line, franchisees eventually go out of business, or they may not go out of business, they sell to somebody else, and it's just disruption in the system. So that's what I would say. I also, one other thing for franchisors, a lot of times I get a question, do we have the right to do this? We'd like to do X or Y. Do we have the right to do it? And I go, well, look at the contract. Yeah, you have the right to do it. But the better answer is, just because you have the right to do it doesn't make it the right thing to do. And so and I think good franchisors do that. They understand, okay, this is how we want to do it, and here's why. And a lot of them, even smaller and mid-sized brands, have franchise advisory committees where they have groups of franchisees that they meet with on a regular basis, and they ask them, what about this? What about that? Or they have subcommittees for advertising or technology or something like that. So anyway, that's where I think that the key is.
Nice. So what legal steps can franchisee take if they feel like their rights are being violated?
Well, I will say lawsuits, but let me kind of back up and say they have contract rights, and in about not quite 24 states, there are state laws, not a federal law, and not every state. There are state laws that protect the franchise relationship. We call franchise relationship laws or dealer protection laws. If you remember, I said earlier, we have these federal and state laws that protect prospective franchisees with disclosure, pre-sale disclosure. These are laws that are designed to protect franchisees from unfair actions by the franchisor. Termination without good cause, termination without notice and opportunity to cure, things of that nature. This kind of an overview of those. But if there's a problem, my recommendation, if a franchisee feels like the franchisor is not treating him or her correctly, talk to the franchisor. Really, have that conversation first. Before you proceed with the dispute resolution under the agreement, litigation, or arbitration. Analyze the issue from the franchisee perspective and the franchisor perspective and the brand and system perspective. Talk with a franchisor. Maybe you can get accommodations. Maybe, someone made a mistake along the way. Mm-hmm. If it really turns out that you, the franchisee, think you have a claim or you've been harmed, there's really, it's primarily a loss, whatever the dispute resolution is, lawsuit, arbitration, and those are in the contract. Maybe a mediation first, and then, what are your claims? Your claims are maybe a breach of contract. You say you franchisor were supposed to do A and you didn't do A. You were supposed to do A and you did B. There may be a violation of the state franchise relationship law that I mentioned. Most franchisors, before they take any sort of action, they look to see, have they followed the rules of the franchise laws, both the registration disclosure laws as well as the relationship laws, and have they followed the contract? But sometimes people have different views of that. And then you go into arbitration or litigation, and occasionally you see franchisees will contact their state agencies. Mm-hmm. That's not that helpful in many cases unless they can prove a registration disclosure violation. But I mean, there is litigation, there is disputes, but I will say that franchising, I don't know that it has any more disputes or arbitration litigation than any other commercial industry. It kind of fits within this framework, and everyone talks about it.
All right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit into the international franchise development.
Okay.
How does international franchise development differ from domestic franchising from a legal perspective?
Well, in the US, I mean, we already talked a little bit about the franchise laws. The structure of many franchise relationships in the US is what's called a direct franchise, a single unit or multi-unit franchise. The franchisor grants a license or franchise to individual franchisees, or grants a license to someone who may do 5 or 10. The big difference internationally, and this is part legal and part business, is that many franchisors, as they develop overseas, they use a different model, use a master franchise. And that's essentially finding someone in the country, a business in the country, that takes on the role of the franchisor, the master franchisee or the sub-franchisor. So the first legal issue is a whole different contract. You have this relationship where the US franchisor, and I'm just focusing on US now, US to go overseas, grants a master franchise right to an entity who then has individual franchise agreements, individual franchise rights that it grants to the sub-franchisees in the country. So you have a different contract. You also have a different fee structure because a franchisor is not going to take the same royalty from all of those operators. The master has to provide all that support and therefore get part of the royalty. Some of it comes back upstream to the US franchisor. The other legal aspect, one other legal aspect is not every foreign country has a franchise law. A number of them do. Quite a few have similar franchise disclosure laws, maybe not registration laws, and it varies. Like Canada, which I know some people think is just the 51st state, but it's not. Canada doesn't have a federal law. They have 6 of their provinces have franchise disclosure laws. Australia has a very robust franchise disclosure regime. Some countries in Europe do as well, but not everyone does. So you have this other set of laws you have to comply with. Couple other legal things, and then we can stop. But one is almost all dispute resolution is international arbitration because no one wants to end up in a foreign country's court. And I don't care how sophisticated or advanced the country is. You'd rather international arbitration is just a better way to resolve disputes. And there are also international tax considerations. How is the franchisor getting its money? It's called currency repatriation from those foreign countries. So there's a number of things to think about there.
So what are some of the unique challenges that franchisors face when expanding internationally?
Part of it's related to that practical side. First of all, do they even understand the country? They have limited knowledge of the country, the culture, the people, the consumers, et cetera. And so you sometimes need consultants to help you. You need to get trademark protection in those countries. You need to identify, in many cases, new or different sources of the products or supplies or menu items that you're going to be using in your franchise business. And you don't, in many cases, other than, let's say, in the US going to Canada or going to Mexico, you don't have boots on the ground. And that's why you turn to the master. So it's a very different structure. You're giving up, as a franchisor, you're giving up a lot of control of your brand to the master. And the other thing is, for franchisors, very few franchisors are really, nationwide. You are diverting resources to focus on foreign franchise or international development when you could be using those resources here in the United States. So you have to really focus on how much money and time and human capital are you spending overseas and what's your return, or should you focus more on expanding in the Southwest or the Northeast or you know, menu development or what have you.
Okay. So I want to talk now about diversity in franchising. And the reason why it's well, for the obvious reason, that's something that's very near and dear to me. But you're one of the leaders of Lathrop's GPMs, increasing diversity in franchise initiatives. Can you tell us a little more about this initiative and why it's important for the franchise industry?
Happy to, yes. So our franchise group, which we've got about 25 lawyers, back in early 2021, I, along with our practice group chair and a couple others, said, okay, you know, as other businesses were, what are looking at the racial inequity and things that came out of the murder of George Floyd. And we said, what can we do as franchise lawyers to help increase diversity in franchising? Well, we can't hire Black or brown franchisees. I mean, we already have a diversity initiative in our law firm. And so we settled on education. So what we did, we had a series of webinars and educational programs on franchising. What is franchising? How franchisors can increase diversity? How diverse prospective franchisees can get into franchising? We've also partnered with other organizations to present these sorts of programs to those organizations. And so our view is that diversity in franchising is beneficial for franchising as an industry, just as it is for diversity in any business. There is a business case for diversity. It also, and the IFA, the International Franchise Association, takes the same view, and they've done a lot of things. That small business ownership is one way to increase, and probably not the only way, but a very good way to increase and improve intergenerational wealth. And I'm not telling this is not news, that underrepresented groups, Black, brown, Hispanic, etc., don't have the same generational wealth as whites do in this country. And one way to do it is increase ownership in small business. And so by educating people on what is franchising, how does it work, what's small business, you can increase the number of people who have one unit, 2 units, 10 units, and build intergenerational wealth. And so that's what we're part of. And one of the things the International Franchise Association, I guess it was earlier this year, they came out with something called their Franchise Ascension Initiative. Mm-hmm. And it is seeding prospective franchisees, and it's in light of certain DEI complaints in the public and the press and the law. It's not just focused on Black or brown prospective franchisees, but people who are deserving of a leg up or assistance, and underrepresented groups as well. And they are providing funding for training and special programs through colleges, mentorship, and then possibly a pitch to brands to offer these people franchises, or get diverse individuals involved in franchising. You can be involved in franchise without owning a franchise. You can become a director of development. You can become the HR director of a franchise, or you can become the director of advertising, all those sorts of things. So we are our practice group, and my practice group chair, Liz Dillon, and me, we've actually personally committed funds to this. And so that's what we're doing in the diversity program.
That's amazing. And I think part of that actually answers my next question, which is what progress have you seen in the industry regarding diversity, and what steps can still be taken?
I've seen some progress. If you were to look at the numbers, and I don't have the figures at my fingertips, franchise ownership by the minority community, minority individuals, is still in the single digit or low double digits. It's increased every year, and there's data that shows a Black-owned franchised business is more profitable or generates more revenue than a Black-owned non-franchise business. So there is data to support this, and so it's growing. And that the more we got to work at it from all angles. Franchisors need to be committed to it, and a lot of franchisors are. And you can tell lip service versus real action. Comes from the top. There are people who are have budgets and are committed to hiring, or they're committed to different programs. And franchisors are also doing a better job of hiring diverse individuals. And whether you like it or not, when someone comes into an organization or approaches a prospective franchisee approaches a franchisor, if they see someone like themselves, they are more receptive. Whether that someone like themselves is the director of development or the real estate director or a franchisee, they're more likely. And so franchisors have got that. School, universities, I told you I fell into franchising. There wasn't a franchise class in my college or my law school.
Yeah.
There's more classes in colleges and law schools and business schools about franchising, and there's going to be more. And so it's the franchisor, if you want to put up top, and it's the prospective franchisees down here that are learning about franchising to create that that pathway to franchise ownership. And so it's working. It's going to take time. It's not something that's going to happen like that, but it's be committed. Now, I'm also, some franchisors are doing other things. They're actually reducing fees for diverse franchisees. They're creating mentorship programs. They're also looking at what someone might call manager to franchisee programs. There's one of the speakers from CertaPro Painters at our webinar a couple years ago said a lot of the managers at the company-owned locations and the franchise locations were Hispanic. They know the business. They're operating it. All they need is capital. And so they're looking to how can they identify those managers to make them and help them become franchisees. And that can happen in any sort of business. So, and then one other thing, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling on here, but working with other suppliers. One of the biggest issues for any business, and particularly for minority-owned businesses, is access to capital. So it's working with banks and other lenders that are committed to lending to A, small businesses, B, franchises, and C, diverse owned franchises. And there are some banks that do that, and some lenders. So it's a matter of working with those sorts of suppliers and vendors that help build this ecosystem of franchising.
Awesome. Some great points and great data behind that as well. So I want to start to end things on the advice for aspiring franchisees and franchisors. Well, for me, I would like to start with me dealing predominantly with franchisees, aspiring franchisees. I always say, follow the process. Do your due diligence and follow the process. Keep connected with me and things of that nature. But what advice would you give to someone looking to become a franchisee?
You just said it. Do your homework, do your due diligence. I've said that earlier. That's really the first thing is figure out whether this business opportunity called franchising, small ownership, business ownership, is for you, and then really dig into that particular industry and that particular brand. Let me give a little story. I was talking to the president of an ice cream brand a number of years ago, and it's a decent sized regional brand. And he told me, he said, before he lets any franchisee sign on the dotted line in the franchise agreement, he says the following: if you think you're getting into the ice cream business, you're not. You're getting into the teenager management business. Think about that. Doesn't matter what you're selling, you're managing teenagers. And so it's important to understand what the business is. Just because you like to eat or like to cook doesn't make it a great business for you. Or just because you
Right.
like pets,
Right.
doggy daycare is not necessarily the best thing for, I mean, it might be because you're passionate about it. Anyway,
Mhm. It
so
takes
really
more than that,
understanding
though,
that.
so I get it. Right.
So, understanding, take away the sign and take away the product. What are you doing every day? Are you willing to get up in the morning, every morning, to make sure you open the restaurant or the store? Or to do it on Sunday when you get a call from the manager, I can't come in today. There's just a lot that not everyone's willing to do. So I would say, do your homework, and I agree with you, follow the system. I mean,
Mhm.
the system is, as I said earlier, they hopefully work the kinks out of the system, and they're working kinks out as they go along. That's what makes it successful.
Mhm.
Everyone can be successful together. So that's what I'd say.
Well, let's talk about the franchisors. For those that are looking to become franchisors, what are the top legal considerations they should keep in mind before launching their franchise?
Flip side of what I just said. What I mean by that is work the kinks out. Understand what it is you're offering and what people are coming to you for. Like I said, anyone can open a business, but they're coming to you because you can help them not just sell donuts or cut grass or teach kids in a tutoring in a business, but how you operate a business, how you get your how you do payroll, things. There's an issue about not going too far into the employment side, but it's how you run a business. So make sure as a franchisor, you're doing everything you can to make a franchisee successful. That's number one. Number two, don't grow too fast.
Mhm.
Number three, support, support, support. Do more than you're supposed to do. Number four, and I mentioned, well, this probably should be number one, look at the franchisee's bottom line. And number five, communicate, not just talk to and instruct franchisees, but listen. Make it a two-way communication. Build that trust, because the franchisees and you, lawyers won't say are partners because that's a legal term, but you're in a collaborative and cooperative relationship, and you both have to do well. And so you need to create that trust. I know it's not a specific advice, but it's a theme. It's a common value that you have to have.
Mhm. So as we wrap things up, um, do you have any final thoughts or advice for our viewers that are interested in franchising?
Keep, I keep saying, keep doing your homework. I mean, remember, franchising is a small business, and it's got its bumps, its challenges, but it can be extremely rewarding. I mean, just running your own business. I mean, I will tell you, I have a friend who wasn't in franchise. He had a very successful business, and when people ask him what he was most proud of, he said, "I was able to hire and put. I had 30 or so employees. I was able to support them. Our business supported them. They bought houses. They had kids. They put their kids through college. It doesn't matter what the business is. So that's number one. Just understanding what small business is. Talk, talk, talk. Ask, ask, ask. Franchisees, franchisors, small business owners, ask them about it. And I will say this: franchising as an industry is very collaborative and very collegial. And when you go to some industry association meetings, everyone's kind of holding back. Franchisors and franchisees and suppliers and vendors are so willing to share what they've learned and their advice. And it's a great community to be part of. Specific things, you can go to the International Franchise Association, IFA, it's franchise.org. They have a lot of guidance there. They have papers and books and sites to webinars and things of that nature. Talking to people like you, Tamika. I mean, just great resources like that. So I would say just keep doing your homework, and then when you're ready to jump in, roll your sleeves up and go for it.
Yeah, I usually make the joke in the beginning, like, besides working with me, But you got it in. You got it in there. It's like it's important to definitely have someone who is familiar, work with a franchise consultant to be able to really understand the different types. As you just said it, like, it's not even about the business. It doesn't matter what business it is. You know what I mean? It's this, are you going to do well in this business? Are you going to be able to grow it, et cetera? And, making sure that you get into the right thing. So I really appreciate it. So I thought this was great information. Thank you so much, Mark, for
It's
joining
my
us.
pleasure. As you can see, I'm passionate about it. I like to talk about it. You can't shut me up. But thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Maybe we'll have you back for another subtopic, because the FDD alone it can be broken up in so many different ways. But yeah, there's so much things that are in there that this little slice may not grab everything. So maybe we'll have you back. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us today. Those of our viewers, thank you for coming back to Franchise Vibes. Thank you again for everyone who has joined us on Franchise Vibes. If there were anything that you heard or would like to know a little bit more, please feel free to reach out to Precision Franchise directly and let us know. Until the next video.